Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking in the mirror, but we aren't looking at the face you see today. We are looking at the blueprint. We are stripping the human head and neck back to the studs to understand how it was built.
Yeah, we're going way back to the first 4 or 5 weeks of development, and it's a pretty chaotic time.
It really is. We are tackling the pharyngeal apparatus. And I have to say, looking at the stack of research for this, we've got Moore Prasad's The Developing Human, and we've got the heavy hitter, I.B. Singh's Human Embryology.
Yeah.
This topic is, it's widely considered the Mount Everest of the embryology curriculum.
Oh, absolutely. It is the classic weed-out topic. It's usually the point where medical students just hit a wall because at first glance, it just looks like a chaotic list of nerves, muscles, and bones with no rhyme or reason.
Right. It feels like pure rote memorization.
It does, but it's not.
But that's why we are here. Because when you cross-reference Moore's clinical vignettes with I.B. Singh's, his really rigorous structural mapping, a pattern does emerge. It isn't chaos.
Yeah.
It's architecture.
It's a story of repetition. A simple, repeated module.
Repetition with variation. That's the phrase from the notes that really stuck with me.
Right.
We are going to see how nature takes a simple tube and, through a series of folds and migrations, turns it into a jaw, a voice box, and a hearing apparatus.
And the coolest part, it's an evolutionary hand-me-down. It's an ancient system.
Okay, right. Let's clear that up immediately before we get into the anatomy.
Yeah.
The texts use pharyngeal and branchial almost interchangeably. Branchial means gills. So the elephant in the room, are we fish?
In a way, yeah. We're using the old fish blueprints to build a human house. I mean, in a fish, these arches actually break open to let water flow over gills for breathing.
They form slits.
They form slits.
Okay.
In humans, as I.B. Singh points out, the membranes between the arches, they almost never rupture. We don't have open slits. But the basic architecture, the series of arches, the blood supply, the nerves, is remarkably similar to the gill system of a fish. We just repurpose them.
So we take a breathing machine and we turn it into a feeding and talking machine. So lay the scene for us. We are 4 weeks in. We are zooming in on the neck region of this tiny C-shaped embryo. What does the apparatus actually look like before it starts moving?
Okay, so imagine looking at the neck region. It doesn't have a smooth contour like you or I. Instead, it looks like a stack of donuts or, these bulging bars of tissue. Those are the pharyngeal arches, stacked from the head down toward the heart.
Okay, so these distinct bulges are the arches.
Okay.
But the sources also talk about pouches, clefts, and membranes. I feel like we need to define the geography clearly before we dive in, or I'm going to get completely lost.
Let's simplify it. Think of the apparatus as a series of room dividers or like thick walls in a hallway. The solid wall itself, that's the arch. It's made of mesenchyme embryonic connective tissue.
Okay, solid part is the arch. Got it.
Now, if you are standing inside the primitive throat in the pharynx and you run your hand along the wall, you'll feel these depressions between the arches. Those internal pockets are the pharyngeal pouches.
Pouch equals pocket inside. Okay.
Now, step outside the embryo, run your hand along the skin of this tiny neck. You'll also feel grooves between the bulging arches. Those external grooves are the pharyngeal clefts. Some texts call them grooves.
Cleft equals cleavage outside.
Exactly. And the really thin spot where the internal pouch and the external cleft almost touch, that little sandwich of tissue, is the pharyngeal membrane.
Okay, that visualization helps a ton. We have the arches, which are the bars, the pouches on the inside, the clefts on the outside, and the membranes where they meet. Now, Moore makes a really big deal about what's inside those arches. He says it's not just normal tissue.
And this is probably the most critical detail to get your head around. The core of these arches is mesenchyme, which is, yes, embryonic connective tissue, but it's not just local mesoderm. It has been heavily, heavily infiltrated by neural crest cells.
Neural crest cells. Okay, remind us. Those are the cells that migrate from the developing neural tube.
Yes. Think of them as the explorers of the embryo. They are these master cells that travel long distances to get to the face. And this matters immensely because these neural crest cells are responsible for forming pretty much all the skeletal elements, the bone and cartilage of the face and skull.
So if they don't show up for work?
If they don't migrate properly or they don't arrive in sufficient numbers, you just don't get a face. Or you get severe anomalies, which we call first ARP syndromes, like Treacher-Collins syndrome. The blueprint is there, but the building materials never showed up on site.
That really sets the stakes. It's not just about forming a lump of tissue. It's about these highly specialized cells arriving at the right time. So we have these arches. How many are we dealing with?
So historically, we number them 1 through 6, cranially to caudally. But here is the trick. and both texts mention this. In humans, the fifth arch is essentially a ghost.
A ghost.
Yeah, it's rudimentary. It either never forms at all, or it just appears for a hot second and then disappears. It has no derivatives. So for all practical purposes, when we are mapping the human neck, we are working with arches 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6.
1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. Fifth one is gone. Okay, so let's get into the grid. I.B. Singh lays this out so beautifully. He describes the apparatus not as one big thing, but as a series of repeated units.
Repetition with variation. There it is again.
And the key to unlocking this, the ready reckoner value he talks about, is realizing that every single arch is like a pre-packaged survival kit. They all contain the exact same 4 ingredients.
That's right. No matter which arch you are in 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, you are going to find a cartilaginous rod, which is the skeleton, a muscle component, an artery, which is one of the aortic arches, and most importantly, a cranial nerve to run the whole show.
And the nerve is the tracking device. If you follow the nerve, you find the arch's territory. So let's apply that to the heavyweight champion of the face, arch number 1.
The mandibular arch. This is the architect of the jaw. It's huge compared to the others, and it actually splits into 2 parts. An upper maxillary prominence and a lower mandibular prominence.
Okay, so this is forming my upper and lower jaw. My mouth, basically.
Yes. Now, here is a fascinating twist that both embryology texts highlight. The cartilage of the first arch is called Meckel's cartilage. And you'd assume, logically, that Meckel's cartilage turns into the mandible bone, right?
That would make sense. Mandibular arch, mandible bone. Seems straightforward.
But biology is rarely that simple. I.B. Singh is very specific here. Meckel's cartilage does not become the mandible. The mandible bone actually forms by intramembranous ossification around it.
So it's like scaffolding. The bone is built around this cartilage scaffold, and then the scaffold is just removed.
Most of it is removed, yeah. It pretty much disappears. But the dorsal end, the part closest to where the ear will be, transforms into something incredible. It ossifies to form 2 tiny bones, the malleus and the incus.
Wait a minute. The bones in my middle ear? The hammer and anvil?
The ear ossicles. Yes, this is a huge aha moment in embryology. Your jaw structure evolutionarily gave rise to the bones that let you hear.
That connects the jaw and the ear in a way I never thought about. Just a massive evolutionary repurposing. You go from a structure for biting to a structure for hearing.
And that explains the nerve supply. The nerve for arch 1 is the trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve 5. Specifically, the mandibular and maxillary divisions.
Which explains why, if you have a bad toothache or TMJ issues, you often feel pain radiating right into your ear.
Exactly. It's referred pain. They share the same developmental address. They're both children of the first arch. And the muscles of mastication, chewing.
Of course. Okay, so moving down the stack, arch number 2, the hyoid arch.
Correct. The cartilage here is called Reichert's cartilage, and I.D. Singh gives us a fantastic mnemonic here. He notes that the derivatives of the second arch often start with the letter S.
The S pattern. I love a good mnemonic. Lay it on me.
Okay, so first, the stapes. That's the third ear bone, the stirrup.
Okay, so malleus and incus are arch 1, stapes is arch 2, the whole set is covered.
Right. Then we have the styloid process of the temporal bone, the stylohyoid ligament. The stapedius muscle, a tiny muscle that attaches to the stapes. And for the muscles generally, the muscles of facial expression, which let you smile.
That is incredibly helpful. Stapes, styloid, smile, and the nerve has to be.
The facial nerve. Cranial nerve 7.
Makes perfect sense. Arch 2 is the expression arch. It's for communication.
And there's also a big structural role for arch 2. Moore points out that the second arch grows incredibly fast. It grows downward like a curtain or a hood, and it actually covers up arches 3 and 4.
It covers them. Why would it do that?
To give you a smooth neck. I mean, if it didn't grow down and smooth everything over, your neck would still look like that stack of donuts we talked about at the beginning. We'll come back to that when we talk about cysts, because that hood mechanism is crucial for understanding certain neck masses.
Okay, putting a pin in that. So, arch 3. What's its job? Getting smaller now.
Arch 3 is kind of the throat anger. It's much smaller. Its cartilage forms the lower part of the hyoid bone.
Oh, so the hyoid bone is a hybrid. Upper part from arch 2, lower part from arch 3.
Exactly. It's a composite bone. The muscle for arch 3 is singular and pretty easy to remember. The stylopharyngeus.
Just one.
It's just one main one. And the nerve is the glossopharyngeal cranial nerve 9.
Glossopharyngeal. Glosso for tongue, pharyngeal for pharynx. That connects to the back of the tongue.
Yes, which is why the posterior third of your tongue gets its sensation and taste from the glossopharyngeal nerve. It's built from arch 3 material.
I'm really starting to see the matrix here. It's not random at all. The nerve follows the arch.
Always. Now, we reach the bottom, arches 4 and 6.
Right, because 5 is the ghost.
Exactly. So 4 and 6 basically fuse together to create the larynx, your voice box. The cartilages, thyroid, cricoid, arytenoid, they all come from here.
So all the muscles for speaking and swallowing.
Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
Arch 4 gives rise to the pharyngeal constrictors and the cricothyroid, while arch 6 forms the intrinsic muscles of the larynx and the nerve.
It has to be the vagus nerve, CNX.
It is. But because we have 2 arches, 4 and 6, we have 2 major branches of the vagus. Arch 4 gets the superior laryngeal nerve. Arch 6 gets the recurrent laryngeal nerve.
The current laryngeal. That's the famous one that takes that crazy detour down into the chest and then comes all the way back up to the larynx.
That's the one. And when you look at the embryology, you see why. It gets hooked around the arteries of the 6th arch. In the embryo, the heart is way up in the neck. As the heart descends into the chest, it literally drags that nerve down with it, looping it around the aorta or the subclavian artery.
So it's trapped. It's trapped by its own developmental history.
It's a beautiful anatomical fossil.
That is fascinating. Okay, so we've built the bars. We have the jaw, the expression muscles, the hyoid, and the voice box. But we also have those internal pockets, the pouches.
The pharyngeal pouches. And remember, these are lined with endoderm, the same lining as your gut. And these pouches are going to balloon out and differentiate into some very surprising glands.
Let's run through them. Pouch 1, what's it doing?
Pouch 1 is located between arch 1 and arch 2. It elongates to form something called the tubotympanic recess.
Tubotympanic. Okay, so that sounds like tube and tympanic as in eardrum.
Exactly. It becomes the auditory tube, what we call the eustachian tube, and the middle ear cavity.
So the first pouch literally connects the back of your throat to your middle ear.
Correct. And remember the pharyngeal membrane, the spot where pouch 1 meets cleft 1, that becomes the tympanic membrane, the eardrum. It's really the only place in the entire apparatus where that original membrane persists and has a function.
Okay, so pouch 2.
Pouch 2 gets largely obliterated by the growing tonsil, but its endodermal lining forms the crypts of the palatine tonsil. The tonsillar fossa, where your tonsils sit, is the remnant of that pouch.
The tonsils.
Yeah.
Simple enough. Now, pouch 3, this is the one where I got confused reading the notes. It says it forms the inferior parathyroid, but pouch 4 forms the superior parathyroid. That seems completely backward.
It does seem backward. It's a classic exam question. Why would the 3rd pouch create the lower gland and the 4th pouch create the upper gland?
Yeah, what's the logic there?
The logic is the Great Migration. Pouch 3 forms 2 things. The inferior parathyroid, but it also forms the thymus.
The thymus, that's the big immune organ that sits in your chest behind the sternum.
Right. And the thymus is large and heavy, embryologically speaking, and it needs to migrate all the way down into the thorax. As it descends, it literally drags its neighbor, the inferior parathyroid, down with it.
So it pulls it down past the derivative of the 4th pouch.
Exactly. It's like getting caught in the slipstream of a semi-truck on the highway. The thymus drags the parathyroid from pouch 3 down low, leaving the parathyroid from pouch 4 sitting higher up in the neck.
That is a great visual. So if you're a surgeon looking for the inferior parathyroid, you need to know it traveled a long way to get there. It could be anywhere along that path.
Absolutely. And sometimes it doesn't stop. You can find ectopic parathyroid tissue all the way down in the mediastinum near the heart if it traveled too far with the thymus.
Wow. And pouch 4 then?
Pouch 4 gives us the superior parathyroid, which stays put. But it also has a ventral part called the ultimobranchial body.
Ultimobranchial, that sounds dramatic.
It is. These cells are the last of the branchial derivatives, and they fuse with the developing thyroid gland. They become the parafollicular cells, or C cells.
And C cells secrete calcitonin.
Right. And interestingly, these specific C cells are derived from neural crest cells that migrated into the pouch first.
It always comes back to the neural crest. They're everywhere.
They are the puppet masters.
Okay, so that covers the inside the pouches. Now let's talk about the outside the clefts, or grooves. You mentioned earlier that only the first one survives.
Right, so we start with 4 clefts on the outside. Cleft 1 is the only one that stays open and forms a permanent structure. It deepens to become the external acoustic meatus, your ear canal.
So just to put it all together, cleft 1 is the ear canal, pouch 1 is the eustachian tube, and the membrane between them is the eardrum. That's a perfect, elegant alignment.
It's a beautiful system. It works perfectly. But then the question is, what about clefts 2, 3, and 4? They have to go away.
And this is where your curtain comes in, the second arch.
Yes. Arch 2 grows rapidly downward like an operculum in a fish, and it fuses with a ridge at the bottom of the neck called the epicardial ridge. This process buries clefts 2, 3, and 4 inside a temporary trapped space called the cervical sinus.
A closed-off room inside the developing neck.
Exactly. And normally the walls of that room fuse and the space just disappears. It gets obliterated. And that's how you get a smooth neck contour.
I'm sensing it, but sometimes it doesn't disappear.
Sometimes it persists. And this brings us to a classic clinical scenario described in Moore. Imagine a 2-year-old child comes into your clinic. The parents have noticed a little bit of mucus or fluid dripping from a tiny pinhole opening on the side of the neck.
Just a little hole in the skin.
A tiny pit. And it's almost always in the same place, along the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle.
That's the big muscle that pops out when you turn your head.
Right. That little pit is a branchial fistula or a branchial sinus. It's the remnant of that cervical sinus that failed to close completely.
And IB Singh make a big deal about the terminology here. Cyst versus sinus versus fistula. This feels like high-yield exam fodder.
It is, and it's clinically important. A cyst is a simple enclosed sac, like a balloon, filled with fluid trapped inside the neck. No opening to the inside or outside.
Okay. Contained.
A sinus is a blind alley. It's a tract that opens to the outside, onto the skin, or R to the inside, into the pharynx, but not both.
And a fistula.
A fistula is a complete tunnel. It's an abnormal connection that runs all the way from the outside on the skin of the neck to the inside, usually opening into the tonsillar fossa.
Wow. And that's because the second pouch, which forms the tonsil, and the second cleft were intimately related way back in development.
Precisely. It's a literal roadmap of where the embryo used to be. The anatomy of the anomaly tells you the story of its development.
Speaking of roadmaps and things moving around, let's talk about the thyroid gland. I think most people, myself included, always assume the thyroid just grew in the neck where it sits.
It's a very common misconception. The thyroid is another great traveler. It starts its life way, way up on the floor of the pharynx, essentially, on the back of your tongue.
On the tongue? How is that even possible?
It starts at a specific point called the foramen cecum. If you stick out your tongue and look in a mirror, there's a little V-shaped line of taste buds called the circumvallate papillae. At the apex of that V, there's a tiny pit. That's the foramen cecum. That is where your thyroid was born.
So it has to get from the tongue all the way down to the lower neck, in front of the trachea.
It descends, passing ventral to or in front of the hyoid bone and the laryngeal cartilages, and as it travels, it stays connected to the tongue by a narrow tube called the thyroglossal duct.
And I assume that duct is supposed to disappear.
Ideally, yes. It should atrophy and vanish, but if parts of it remain, you get a thyroglossal duct cyst.
How is that different from the branchial cysts we just talked about? They're both lumps in the neck. This seems like a key diagnostic challenge.
It's a classic board question and a key clinical pearl you use every day. Branchial cysts are lateral. They are on the side of the neck near that sternocleidomastoid muscle. Thyroglossal cysts are almost always midline.
Midline. Okay, that's a huge clue.
And here is the physical exam trick that proves the embryology. Because the thyroid is developmentally connected to the tongue via that tract, if you ask the patient to stick out their tongue or to swallow, a thyroglossal cyst will move up.
It moves with the tongue because it's still tethered to its origin.
Exactly. It's being pulled up from its anchor point. A branchial cyst won't do that.
That is such a cool practical application of embryology. It's not just theory. It helps you diagnose a patient right there in the clinic.
And sometimes the thyroid doesn't make it down at all. It can get stuck. You can have a lingual thyroid, an entire thyroid gland that just sat down on the back of the tongue and refused to move.
Can you live with that?
You can, but it can cause obstruction or difficulty swallowing. And more importantly, if you see a mass on the back of a child's tongue, you have to be very careful before you decide to just remove it. You need to do a scan first, because that might be the only thyroid tissue they have.
Oh, wow. Don't cut out somebody's only thyroid thinking it's just a random cyst.
Exactly. First, do no harm.
We can't talk about the floor of the mouth without talking about the tongue itself. And honestly, reading the section on tongue development in IB Singh gave me a headache. It seems like the tongue is stitched together from scraps of every other project in the neighborhood.
It is the ultimate composite organ. It's a total patchwork quilt.
It involves, what, 4 different arches?
At least. And that explains why the nerve supply to the tongue is so notoriously complicated. I mean, if you've ever wondered why you have one nerve for taste, another for feeling a burn on your tongue, and a completely different one for moving the muscle, it's all embryology.
Okay, let's try to break it down. The front of the tongue, the part we see. The anterior, 2/3.
Okay, that comes from arch 1. We start with 3 swellings on the floor of the pharynx, 2 lateral lingual swellings, and 1 little median swelling called the tuberculum impar.
Great name. Tuberculum impar.
The side swellings grow super fast, and they merge over the top of the middle one. So since they are arch 1, what nerve do they bring with them?
Arch 1 is trigeminal, cranial nerve 5. So that supplies the sensation, touch, pain.
General sensation, yes. Pain, temperature, touch. But the trigeminal nerve doesn't do taste.
So the front of the tongue needs to borrow a taste nerve from somewhere else.
Exactly. It hijacks the chorda tympani branch, which comes from the facial nerve, the nerve of arch 2.
So just to get this straight, the front of the tongue is an arch 1 structure with arch 1 sensation, but it's hijacked by an arch 2 nerve for its sense of taste.
That's it. Correct. Now, go to the back of the tongue, the posterior third.
This is from the hypobranchial eminence.
Yes. This is primarily an arch 3 structure, and arch 3 brings its own nerve, the glossopharyngeal cranial nerve 9.
And looking at the diagram, the glossopharyngeal does everything back there. Taste and general sensation.
It's a one-stop shop for the posterior tongue, and a little bit of arch 4 contributes to the very, very back, which is why the vagus nerve is there too.
And then, just to make it even more complicated, the muscles don't come from the arches at all.
Nope. The intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the tongue migrate in from the occipital myotomes from the back of the head, and they drag their nerve supply, the hypoglossal nerve, cranial nerve 12, with them.
So to stick out your tongue and taste a strawberry, you are coordinating derivatives from arch 1, arch 2, arch 3, and the occipital somites all at once.
It's a logistical miracle that it works at all.
Okay, let's shift gears to the main event. The face. We've built the neck, the glands, the ears, the tongue. How do we build the face itself?
The face forms between the 4th and 8th weeks, and it starts as 5 swellings or prominences surrounding the primitive mouth, which we call the stomodium.
5 prominences.
Right. Picture a central one coming down from the forehead. That's the frontonasal prominence. Then you have a matched pair from the sides, the maxillary prominences, and another matched pair from below, the mandibular prominences.
So 1 from the top, 2 from the sides, 2 from the bottom.
Exactly. The mandibular prominences are the first to act. They fuse in the midline very early to form the chin and the lower lip. That's the foundation.
Okay, so the lower jaw is set.
Right. The real drama happens in the upper lip. The front nasal prominence, the top one, develops these 2 thickened areas called nasal placodes. They invaginate to form nasal pits, and the rims of these pits bulge out to form the medial and lateral nasal prominences.
Sounds like a lot of moving parts. A lot of things have to meet up correctly.
It is. To form a proper upper lip, the 2 maxillary prominences, your future cheeks, have to grow inward toward the middle. As they do, they squish the 2 medial nasal prominences together until they fuse at the midline.
So the upper lip is actually a fusion of the cheeks and the nose parts.
Specifically, the middle of your upper lip, the philtrum, that little divot right under your nose, comes from the 2 fused medial nasal prominences. The sides of your upper lip come from the maxillary prominences.
And there's a groove between them at first.
Yes, the nasolacrimal groove. It runs from the eye down. This groove gets buried during the fusion process and sinks inward to become the nasolacrimal duct, your tear duct.
And if they don't meet, if that fusion fails,
You get a cleft lip, a failure of the maxillary prominence to merge with the medial nasal prominence.
Okay, now is cleft lip the same as cleft palate? I think people often confuse them.
They are embryologically distinct, even though they very often happen together. Cleft lip is a failure of that external fusion we just described. It's a failure to build the front of the face.
And cleft palate.
Cleft palate happens inside the mouth. It involves the palatine shelves. These are like little ledges of tissue growing inward from the maxillary prominences. Initially, they hang down vertically on either side of the tongue.
They hang down.
Because the tongue is big and it's in the way, as the jaw grows and elongates, the tongue drops down out of the way. As soon as it does, these shelves flip up horizontally like a drawbridge raising and fuse in the midline to form the hard palate, the roof of your mouth.
But that seems like a very, very delicate maneuver. Tongue has to drop, shelves have to flip up, then they have to fuse.
It is incredibly delicate. If the tongue doesn't drop, or the shelves are too small, or they just fail to fuse for any reason, you get a cleft palate.
And Moore mentions an interesting statistic about gender here.
He does. Cleft lip, with or without cleft palate, is more common in males, but an isolated cleft palate is more common in females.
Do we know why?
For cleft palate in females, it's thought that the palatal shelves fuse about a week later in female embryos than they do in males, and that extra week just leaves them vulnerable to disruption for a longer period of time.
That's incredible detail.
Okay.
Okay, we have touched on clefting, but I want to dive into the so what of all this. The clinical syndromes. We mentioned first arch syndromes at the very beginning.
Yes, and these are fascinating because they really drive home the importance of those neural crest cells we started with.
The explorers, the master builders.
Right. If the neural crest cells fail to migrate properly into the first arch, you get syndromes like Treacher-Collins syndrome or mandibulofacial dysostosis.
What does that look like clinically?
Well, think about what the first arch makes. The jaw, the mandible, and the cheekbones, the zygomatic bones. In Treacher-Collins, these bones are hypoplastic. They're underdeveloped. So the child has sunken cheeks, a very small chin, downward slanting eyes, and often malformed ears.
And then there is Pierre-Robin sequence. Why is it called a sequence and not a syndrome?
A sequence is a great concept. It means one primary thing goes wrong, and that single error triggers a whole domino effect of other problems.
So what's the first domino to fall in Pierre-Robin?
Micrognathia, a severely underdeveloped mandible. That's the first arch defect. Because the jaw is so small, the tongue has literally nowhere to go, so it gets pushed backward and upward into the pharynx, a condition called glossoptosis.
Okay, small chin pushes the tongue back. Second domino.
And because the tongue is pushed back and up, it sits right in between those two palatal shelves we just talked about. It physically blocks them from flipping up and closing.
So the cleft palate in Pierre-Robin isn't a primary failure of the palate itself. It's a mechanical consequence of the small chin.
Exactly. Small chin leads to tongue obstruction, which leads to cleft palate. That is the sequence. It's a chain reaction.
That logic is so satisfying. It makes it so much easier to understand and remember than just memorizing a list of symptoms.
And it changes how you treat it, too. In a newborn with Pierre-Robin, the first priority is the airway, making sure that tongue doesn't fall back and block the throat.
One more big syndrome that came up in the outline, DiGeorge syndrome.
Yes, 22q 11.2 deletion syndrome. This one is a defect in the development of the pouches, specifically the third and fourth pharyngeal pouches.
So let's recall the derivatives. Pouch 3 is the thymus and the inferior parathyroid. Pouch 4 is the superior parathyroid.
Correct. So in DiGeorge syndrome, the classic triad is, first, the thymic aplasia no thymus, or a very small one, which means...
Major immune system problems. T cells can't mature properly.
Exactly. Second, parathyroid aplasia, no parathyroids, which means...
No parathyroid hormone, so you get low calcium in the blood. Hypocalcemia, which can cause seizures.
Right. And third, because the neural crest is also involved in partitioning the outflow tract of the heart, you often get major cardiac defects.
The mnemonic key TCH22 is often used for, right? Cardiac defects, abnormal facies, thymic aplasia, cleft palate, hypocalcemia, all from the deletion on chromosome 22. It all ties back to that pharyngeal development.
It really is the master key that unlocks the anatomy and pathology of the entire head and neck region.
It is. When you look at a face now, you don't just see eyes and a mouth. You see the fusion lines. You see the philtrum, where the medial nasal prominences met the maxillary prominences. You see the ear, which is a collection of little bumps from arch 1 and 2 that all fuse together.
And you see the jaw that holds the ghost of the ear bones, Meckel's ghost.
So if we want to leave our listener with a ready reckoner, a way to keep this all straight when they're studying, what should they visualize?
I would say visualize the grid that I.B. Singh uses in his book. Make the rows the R's, 1, 2, 3, 46. Make the columns the nerve, the cartilage bone, and the muscle. If you just learn the nerves in order, V, 7, Ni, X, the rest follows logically from there.
And for the pouches, visualize the migration. Pouch 1, ear. Pouch 2, tonsil. Pouch 3, the great migration of the thymus and inferior parathyroid. And pouch 4, the superior parathyroid and its T cell buddies.
And the simple rule for the clefts, only the first one matters. It becomes the ear canal. The rest are buried under that big arch 2 curtain.
Simple, elegant. And if you have a moment, I highly, highly recommend finding the scanning electron micrographs, the SEM images in Moore or I.B. Singh. Seeing the actual embryo face at 4 or 5 weeks, it honestly looks like an alien.
It really does. The eyes are on the side of its head. The nostrils are wide apart. It's completely unrecognizable.
And watching that transform into a human face is probably the most complex and beautiful origami that nature performs. Thanks for guiding us through the donuts, the clefts, and the ghosts of the pharyngeal apparatus.
My pleasure. It was fun.
And remember, this is just a guide. Open the books more. I sing. Look at the diagrams, trace the pathways. We've given you the map, but you really have to walk the territory yourself.
See you on the next deep dive.